Think now about how we would go about forming a scientific theory that had theism and God in it. How would we do that? And because material science starts from the assumption that there isn't a God, so what can we do? Well, the obvious thing is to start from an assumption or a postulate that there is a God. We're allowed, if some people is allowed to start by assuming that there is no God, then we can form another building next door which is built on the assumption that there is a God, and we can follow that as an alternative. So it's in contrast to the naturalistic way. And then we have to spell out the basic ideas of theism. We have to spell it out without ambiguity, in a non-metaphorical way. We have to form ideas that can be understood as literally true. I mean, because when people look at, say, Genesis, they say, Genesis, the first chapter is true, but not literally true. Okay, but what is Genesis 1 referring to? That's the question. And if we were to understand what's going on, we should have an idea about what Genesis 1 is actually referring to. And the consequence of this is that no paradoxes are allowed. Okay? Some philosophers are very keen on paradoxes, and here's an example of a visual paradox, a box which is paradoxical in 3 dimensions. You can't have that in 3 dimensions. So, by paradox, I mean 2 things which contradict each other, saying some philosophies of religion say that we are God, but we're distinct from God at the same time. Okay, so that's what I mean by a paradox. When 2 things are held that appear to contradict each other, or do contradict each other, but they're held at the same time. So that means we want to avoid all paradoxes, because it's well known from the logical point of view that if you have 2 things which contradict each other at the same time, then you can prove anything. That's the general feature of an inconsistent system is useless. So we want to keep rational consistency. And so therefore we emphasize a lot the rational consistency of the ideas that we're trying to present. And then furthermore, this is a general question of, actually it's a matter of taste, but this is the way that I've decided to proceed. Instead of saying that minds are nothing but brains, or that souls are nothing but minds, or that God is nothing but something, an idea in our mind, or God is nothing but the cosmos, or everything that there is, I want to avoid these, what I call reductionists, or nothing but explanations. We need to have a proper account of how there can be, for example, minds, and how they're related to brains, how they're connected, but they're not equal to each other. They're distinct, they're causally, one can affect the other can affect the one, and without demolishing to say we don't actually have minds. Because if we don't have minds, we don't think, we don't have ideas, we don't have feelings. So it's a serious problem to deny that there are minds. Then lastly, to make theistic science, we want to make predictions and compare with experiments. And we say that if the predictions are confirmed, then this is evidence in support of theistic science. That's the general principles of doing science, and we'll see as we do this whether you agree that the starting point is confirmed. Because we'll discuss later how you can prove things. Now, if I present these ideas to a scientific group, there are some standard responses that they make. Some scientific objections to theism, and the first one is that if God were allowed as an explanation in science, then anything goes. They say no matter what happens, you can say, oh, God did it. The explanation of God did it could be used for any event whatsoever. Because God, they think of as some person with a free will outside reality who's not bound by any of the natural laws or anything, and so they think that's sort of so overwhelmingly different and would interfere with everything that they do. And if that were to happen, then you couldn't form any rules or patterns or regular or irregular activities. Comprehensible or incomprehensible things could equally well be explained by God. If God was making miracles happen all the time, then this wouldn't make sense. You couldn't do science like this. But we want to start by replying to this objection is that God is not some arbitrary and capricious old man who can do what he likes. I mean, it's clear that as you get better at understanding of religion, there's a certain constancy and reliability about God, which not everyone agrees with, but as you get a better understanding, in my opinion, in fact, as the religions and the churches get a better understanding of God, there's it doesn't look like this. So that means that if we want to allow for a scientific theism, we want to say that the previous reasons for opposing theism in science arise from misunderstandings about the nature of God. And we'll discuss, that's why we have to make it quite clear what the foundations for our theism is and explain it in a simple, rational way, without contradiction, without paradox, and to avoid these particular misunderstandings. And I believe that with the help of Swedenborg, we'll see later, there are some basic ideas which can be used in this way. And as I said, we know that there are considerable regularities in the world. And we should be able to explain the source and nature and reasons for these regularities. And as an example of this, we can say that the source of regularities might be the constancy and eternality of the love and wisdom of God. So that's a beginning of an explanation within theistic science about why there are regularities. But we then have to explain what's more about how these, with love and wisdom of God, operate and what the regularities that result and what they are.